The Thames moves slowly through London on an autumn evening. Pale fog gathers along the stone embankments. Lamplight catches the surface of the water, breaking into fragments that drift and reform with each small current. The river has carried silt and history for thousands of years, and tonight it carries them still, unhurried, beneath bridges that have stood for generations and others that replaced bridges long forgotten. Along the northern bank, where the water bends, there is a tower. It rises from a cluster of older buildings, pale stone against the dimming sky. The tower is not alone. It shares its foundation with halls and chambers, with corridors that have witnessed centuries of conversation, argument, and silence. But the tower is what the eye finds first. It climbs upward in stages, each level slightly narrower than the one below, until it reaches a pinnacle that seems to test the air itself. At this hour, the streets nearby are quieter. Footsteps echo on pavement. A few figures move along the embankment, their shoulders hunched against the cool air. Some glance upward at the tower, but most do not. It has been there all their lives. It has been there longer than that. The stone of the tower holds the last warmth of the day. If you were to place your hand against it, you would feel a coolness that has not yet become cold, a surface that has been smoothed by rain and wind and the passage of time. The stone came from elsewhere. It was cut from the earth in places far from this riverbank, carried over roads and water, shaped by hands that knew the weight of it, the grain of it, the way it would sit against other stones. Above the streets, above the fog, the tower holds a clock. 4 faces, each one turned toward a different quarter of the city. The faces are large, larger than most who see them realize. The numerals are simple, clear, designed to be read from a great distance. The hands move steadily, marking the hours and the minutes with a precision that does not falter, does not rest. And higher still, within the tower, there is a bell. The bell is bronze, heavy beyond easy comprehension. It hangs in a chamber of its own, suspended in a frame built to bear its weight and the force of its ringing. The bell does not ring constantly, it rings on the hour. When it does, the sound moves outward in waves, crossing the river, traveling down streets, slipping through windows left open to the night. The sound is deep, resonant, a voice made of metal and air. The bell has a name, though it is not a name the bell gave itself. People call it Big Ben. Some say the name belongs to the bell, others say it belongs to the tower, and still others insist it belongs to neither, that it is simply what Londoners call the place where the sound comes from. The confusion does not matter. The name has settled into common use, and language follows paths of least resistance, like water. But the bell and the tower and the clock did not arrive fully formed. They were not always here. There was a time when this bend in the river held older structures, older purposes. There was a time when the idea of a tower with a clock and a bell was only an idea, something discussed in rooms lit by candles, something sketched on paper, something imagined but not yet real. To understand how the tower came to be, you must go back, not to the beginning of London, that is too far, too diffuse, but to a moment when the city had grown large enough to need symbols, to need markers of time and authority, to need structures that could be seen and heard from miles away. The old palace by the river had stood for centuries. It was a place of governance, of ceremony, of power both visible and invisible. But by the early part of the 19th century, much of it had grown old, unstable. Fires had come and gone. Floors had weakened. Roofs had leaked. There were rooms no one entered anymore, corridors that led nowhere useful. In the autumn of 1834, a fire came that did not go. It started in a place meant for storage, where old wooden tallies, sticks once used to record accounts, were being burned in a stove. The tallies were dry, ancient, and there were too many of them. The fire found fuel, it found beams, it found centuries of timber and plaster and neglect. By nightfall, the flames were visible across the city. People gathered along the riverbanks to watch. The old palace burned through the night, and when morning came, much of it was gone. What remained was smoke and rubble and a question: what should be built in its place? The question was not answered quickly. Committees were formed, proposals were submitted. Architects drew plans that were reviewed, debated, revised, discarded. There was disagreement about style, about cost, about whether the new buildings should echo the past or embrace a different vision entirely. Eventually, a design was chosen. The architect was a man named Charles Barry, and his vision was Gothic, a style that reached back to medieval England, to pointed arches and intricate stonework, to buildings that seemed to grow from the earth rather than simply rest upon it. Bari's design included a tower, a tall one, a tower that would hold a clock. But Bari was not a clockmaker, and the tower would need more than stone. It would need mechanism, precision, a heart that could beat without tiring. For that, another man would be needed. Benjamin Hall was a politician, a man of considerable size and presence who oversaw the project. Some say the bell was named for him, others say it was named for a prizefighter of the same era, a man known for his weight and strength. The truth is uncertain, and perhaps it does not matter. Names attach themselves to things for reasons both deliberate and accidental, and once attached, they are difficult to remove. The tower began to rise in the late 1840s. The foundation was dug deep into the clay and gravel beside the river. The Thames is not a gentle presence. Its water presses against anything built near it, seeping into cracks, eroding mortar, testing the strength of stone. The engineers knew this. They sank the foundation with care, layering concrete and brick, creating a base that would not shift, would not settle unevenly. Then came the stone, pale limestone quarried from the ground in Anston, a village far to the north. The stone was hard, fine-grained, capable of holding detail. It arrived in blocks, each one numbered, each one destined for a particular place in the rising structure. Masons worked in all weather, shaping the blocks, fitting them together with a precision that left little room for error. The work was slow. Towers do not appear overnight. Seasons passed. Workers returned each morning, climbing scaffolding that rose higher as the walls rose, until they were working at heights where the wind was constant, where the city spread below them in patterns of rooftops and smoke. The tower climbed in stages. The lower levels were solid, functional, housing stairways and rooms for storage, for machinery that would eventually drive the clock. Higher up, the walls became more decorative, more intricate. Stone tracery framed openings. Small pinnacles rose at the corners. The tower was not merely a structure, it was a statement, a piece of architecture meant to be admired. But admiration was not the tower's only purpose. It had to work. The clock would be the largest and most accurate public timepiece in the world. That was the ambition. To achieve it, the government turned to a man named Edmund Denison, a lawyer by training but a horologist by passion, someone who understood not just how clocks worked, but how they could be made to work better. Denison was meticulous. He was also difficult. He argued with engineers, with builders, with anyone who suggested a compromise that might affect the clock's accuracy. He believed that a public clock had a responsibility, that people would set their lives by it, that trains would depart according to its time, that the entire rhythm of a city might, in small ways, depend on whether the mechanism kept faith with the turning of the earth. The mechanism Denison designed was enormous. It filled a room within the tower, a space of iron gears and wheels, of weights that hung on cables, descending slowly through shafts as the hours passed. The clock did not run on springs. It ran on gravity. Heavy weights, each one weighing hundreds of pounds, pulled downward, turning gears, driving the hands that showed on the four faces far above. The gears were cut with extraordinary precision. Each tooth had to mesh perfectly with the next. Any wobble, any unevenness, and the clock would lose time or gain it, drifting away from the true measure of the day. Denison would not allow drift. He tested the mechanism again and again, adjusting, refining, until it met his standards. The clock faces themselves were vast. Each one was more than 20 feet across. The minute hands were 14 feet long, made of copper to keep them light enough for the mechanism to move. The hour hands were shorter, but still massive, each one weighing more than 200 pounds. The numbers were cast iron, nearly 2 feet tall, gilded to catch the light. Behind each face was a network of gears and shafts that connected to the central mechanism. The four faces had to show the same time always. If one face drifted, even by a second, the clock would lose its authority. Denison ensured they would not drift. The mechanism was a single unit, driving all four faces together so that anyone looking from any direction would see the same truth. But the clock was not complete without the bell. The bell was cast in 1856. It was made at a foundry in Stockton-on-Tees, far to the north, in a region where ironworking and metalworking were trades passed down through generations. The metal was bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, mixed in precise proportions to create a tone that would resonate, that would carry. The bell was enormous. It weighed more than 13 tons. To cast it, molten metal was poured into a mold shaped like the negative space of a bell, a hollow that would, when the metal cooled, become solid sound. The process required heat, timing, and faith that the metal would flow evenly, that it would not crack as it cooled, that the tone, when struck, would be pure. The bell was cast successfully. It was transporting to London by sea and by river, a journey that took days, the bell resting on a barge that moved slowly upstream, passing villages and fields, drawing crowds who came to see the thing that would soon hang in the tower by the Thames. It arrived in London in 1856 and was placed temporarily in the palace yard where it could be tested. A hammer struck it, and the sound that emerged was deep, resonant, but not quite right. There was a crack, small at first, barely visible but present. The bell had failed its first test. It was decided that the bell would need to be recast. The metal was broken down, melted again, and in 1858 a second bell was cast. This one was slightly lighter, slightly different in proportion, tuned more carefully. It was brought to the tower and hoisted into the belfry, a process that took hours, the bell rising slowly on chains, guided by workers who understood that a mistake here could be catastrophic. The bell was hung in a frame designed to hold it, to allow it to swing slightly when struck, so that the sound would emerge fully without dampening. The hammer that would strike it was also enormous, weighing several hundred pounds, designed to swing and make contact with the rim of the bell, where the metal was thickest. In 1859, the clock began to run, the hands moved, the mechanism turned, and on the hour the bell rang. The sound traveled, it crossed the river, it moved down streets and alleys, it reached neighborhoods where people paused, looked up, adjusted their own clocks and watches. The sound became part of the city's rhythm, a marker that did not need to be seen, only heard. But the second bell cracked too. Within months, a fracture appeared, thinner than the first but still present. There was debate about what to do. Some wanted to cast a third bell. Others argued that the crack was small, that the bell could still function, that the tone, while slightly altered, was still acceptable. In the end, the bell was turned. The hammer was adjusted to strike a different part of the rim, a section that was not cracked. The sound changed slightly, became a little less resonant, but it was still Big Ben. The crack remains. It is there now, a line in the bronze, a flaw that did not end the bell's purpose, but became part of its character. The clock and the bell and the tower settled into their work. Days became weeks, weeks became years. The mechanism required care. Clockmakers climbed the stairs regularly, checking the gears, oiling the shafts, making small adjustments to keep the time accurate. The weights had to be wound, a process that involved turning large cranks, raising the weights back to the top of their shafts so they could descend again, pulling the mechanism forward through another cycle. The winding was done by hand at first, a task that required strength and patience. Later, a motor was installed to assist, but the principle remained the same. Gravity drove the clock, and human effort restored the potential for gravity to act. The accuracy of the clock was monitored by astronomers. They compared its time to the stars, to the sun's passage, to calculations that defined the length of a day with precision beyond what most people would ever notice. When the clock drifted, even by a fraction of a second, adjustments were made. Sometimes this meant altering the weight of the pendulum, adding or removing tiny coins placed on top of it. A single penny could change the clock's rate by a measurable amount, speeding it or slowing it until it matched the heavens. The pendulum itself was a marvel. It was 13 feet long, made of steel and zinc in a combination designed to resist the effects of temperature. Metal expands when warm, contracts when cold, and such changes could affect the pendulum's length, altering the clock's accuracy. The designers compensated for this, creating a pendulum that balanced materials in such a way that temperature variations canceled each other out, leaving the clock unaffected by the weather. The clock faced weather constantly. Rain fell on the tower, seeping into cracks, freezing in winter, expanding, testing the mortar. Wind pressed against the clock faces, a force that the hands had to push through with every movement. Snow gathered on the stonework, adding weight, sometimes blocking the mechanisms that allowed the bells to ring. Workers climbed the tower in all seasons, clearing ice, repairing damage, ensuring that the clock continued. There were interruptions. During the First World War, the bells were silenced at night so that their sound would not guide enemy aircraft. The clock faces were darkened, their light extinguished, leaving the tower as a shadow against the sky. The war ended and the bells rang again, but the silence had been a reminder that even structures built to last could be affected by events beyond their control. The Second World War brought greater danger. Bombs fell on London night after night. The tower stood near the river, near government buildings, near targets that drew the attention of aircraft flying overhead. The clock kept running, even as fires burned nearby, even as rubble filled streets that had been clear the day before. One night, a bomb struck the Palace of Westminster, damaging the chamber where debates had been held for generations. The tower was hit too, though not directly. Shrapnel scarred the stonework, glass broke in the clock faces, but the mechanism survived. The bells rang the next morning, and the sound was a defiance, a statement that the city was still there, still measuring time, still standing. After the war, repairs were made. The damaged stone was replaced. The clock faces were restored. The mechanism was cleaned, adjusted, returned to its precise rhythm. The tower resumed its quiet work, marking hours for a city that was rebuilding, recovering, moving forward. Decades passed. The tower became something taken for granted, a fixture so constant that its presence was noticed mainly in its absence. When the bells were silenced for maintenance, people commented on the quiet, on how strange it felt not to hear the hour announced. The sound had woven itself into the fabric of London, a thread that, when pulled, left a noticeable gap. The mechanism aged, parts wore down, requiring replacement. The iron and steel that had seemed so permanent in the 19th century began to show the effects of 150 years of continuous motion. Gears developed tiny imperfections. Shafts bent slightly under the weight they carried. The clockmakers adapted, fabricating new parts to match the old, maintaining the mechanism's integrity while allowing it to continue. In the 21st century, the decision was made to undertake a major restoration. The tower would be enclosed in scaffolding. The clock would be stopped, for the first time in decades, for longer than most people could remember. The work would take years. The scaffolding rose around the tower, a cage of metal that obscured the stone, turned the familiar silhouette into something strange. Workers climbed inside, inspecting every level, every surface. They found cracks in the masonry, places where water had penetrated, where the iron framework holding the structure together had begun to rust. They found soot, layers of it, deposited over more than a century, darkening the stone until its original color was nearly forgotten. The restoration was painstaking. Stone was cleaned, repaired, replaced where necessary. The ironwork was treated, painted, protected against further corrosion. The clock faces were removed, taken apart, each piece cleaned and restored before being reassembled. The hands were regilded. The mechanism was disassembled, each gear examined, each bearing checked, everything brought back to the standard Denison would have recognized. The bell remained. It was cleaned but not altered. The crack stayed. It is part of the bell's history now, a mark that does not diminish its function but adds to its story. When the restoration was complete, the scaffolding came down. The tower emerged, paler than it had been, the stone revealing a color that Londoners had not seen in generations. The clock started again, the hands moved, the bells rang. The sound was the same, deeper than expected if you had never heard it up close, resonant in a way that makes the air feel heavier. It travels across the water, down streets, through open windows. It marks the hour, and people adjust their pace, check their watches, note the time without thinking much about where it comes from. The tower stands beside the river, as it has for more than 150 years. The Thames moves past it, carrying silt and history, indifferent to the structures built along its banks. The water will outlast the tower, as it has outlasted everything else, but for now, the tower is here, and the clock runs, and the bell rings. Inside the tower, the mechanism turns, gears mesh, the pendulum swings, weights descend, pulling the clock forward second by second. The motion is constant, steady, a rhythm that does not pause for night or day, for summer or winter. The clock does not know what time it keeps, it only keeps it. The faces show the hours to anyone who looks up. The hands are large enough to be seen from far away, moving slowly enough that their motion is invisible unless you watch for several minutes. The minute hand completes its circle in an hour. The hour hand takes 12 hours. The cycle repeats endlessly as long as the mechanism is maintained, as long as someone climbs the stairs to wind the weights, to check the gears, to ensure that everything continues. At night, the faces are illuminated. Light shines through the glass, turning the clock into a beacon. From across the river, from miles away, the light is visible, 4 pale circles against the dark stone. The light has been there so long that its absence would be unsettling, a sign that something had gone wrong. The bell rings on the hour. The sound begins as an impact, metal on metal, the hammer striking the rim. Then the tone emerges, spreading outward, filling the space around the tower before moving beyond it. The sound lasts for seconds, fading gradually, leaving a silence that feels different from the silence before. People hear it without listening. It is part of the background, part of the soundscape of the city. But sometimes, late at night, when the streets are quieter and the river is still, the bell rings and someone pauses, looks up, remembers that they are in a place where time is marked by a voice made of bronze and air, a voice that has been speaking for more than a century and a half. The tower does not speak. It holds the clock and the bell, provides the structure they need to function. The stone bears the weight without complaint, without acknowledgement. The tower is patient. It has stood through wars, through changes in government, through the slow transformation of the city around it. It has watched the river, and the river has ignored it, as rivers ignore everything that does not lie directly in their path. The clockmakers still climb the stairs. They carry tools, oil, replacement parts. They know the mechanism intimately, every gear, every shaft, every point where wear is likely. They make their adjustments in near silence, working by lamplight in rooms that few people ever see. The stairs are narrow, winding, each step worn smooth by the passage of feet over decades. The climb is long, but the clockmakers do not hurry. They understand that the work they do is part of a continuity, that they are maintaining something that others maintained before them, that others will maintain after. There is a room near the top of the tower where the pendulum swings. The room is quiet, despite the city outside, despite the mechanism turning nearby. The pendulum moves back and forth, a slow arc, each swing taking a second. The motion is hypnotic if you watch it long enough, a rhythm that matches breathing, that settles into the body's own sense of time. Above the pendulum room, the bell chamber is larger, colder. The bell hangs in its frame, massive and still except when struck. The hammer rests nearby, waiting. The chamber has openings on all sides, arches that allow the sound to escape, that frame views of the city in 4 directions. From here, London spreads out in layers, rooftops and streets, parks and monuments, all of it held together by the river that curves through the center. The view changes with the light. In the morning, the sun rises over the eastern part of the city, casting long shadows, turning windows into mirrors. At midday, the light is flat, revealing detail, erasing softness. In the evening, the city glows, lights coming on in windows, street lamps marking roads, the river reflecting the sky's fading colors. At night, the city becomes a field of lights, a constellation that shifts as people move, as traffic flows, as life continues. The tower does not see this. It has no awareness, but it is part of what is seen, a point of reference, a marker that orients. From the tower, you can see the city. From the city, you can see the tower. The relationship is reciprocal, neither more important than the other, both necessary. The mechanism requires precision, but it also requires tolerance. Metal expands and contracts. Lubricants thin in heat, thicken in cold. Dust accumulates. The clock must work despite these variations, must maintain its accuracy even as conditions change. The designers understood this. They built in adjustments, allowances, ways for the clock to adapt without losing its essential function. The pendulum is key. It swings at a rate determined by its length and the force of gravity. As long as these remain constant, the pendulum's rhythm does not change. The rest of the mechanism follows from this rhythm, each gear turning at a rate determined by the one before it. the entire system synchronized to the pendulum's swing. When adjustments are needed, they are small. A coin added to the pendulum, a slight change in the position of a weight. The clockmakers observe the results, compare the clock's time to a standard, make further adjustments if necessary. The process is iterative, patient, guided by measurement rather than intuition. The clock does not rush. It cannot. Its speed is fixed by the pendulum, by the gears, by the design that has governed it since it was built. The clock moves forward at the rate the world turns, no faster, no slower. It is a translation of planetary motion into something visible, audible, something human-scaled. The bell's tone has been analyzed, broken down into frequencies compared to other bells. It is not a pure tone. No bell produces a pure tone. The sound is a mixture, a fundamental note accompanied by harmonics, overtones, resonances that give the sound depth and character. The crack in the bell adds its own contribution, a slight dissonance that makes the tone recognizable, distinct from what it might have been. The bell does not ring continuously. It rings on the hour and sometimes on the quarter hour when smaller bells join it, creating a sequence of sounds that marks the passage of time in smaller increments. The quarter bells are higher in pitch, lighter, their tones clear and bright. Together, the bells create a pattern, a musical phrase that repeats, that becomes familiar to anyone who hears it often enough. The pattern is known as the Westminster Quarters. It was composed in the 19th century, adapted from a phrase in Handel's Messiah. The melody is simple, 4 phrases that correspond to the 4 quarter hours. At 15 minutes past the hour, 1 phrase plays. At 30 minutes, 2 phrases. At 45 minutes, 3. On the hour, all 4 phrases play, followed by the deep tolling of Big Ben, striking once for each hour. The melody has been copied, used in clocks and chimes around the world. But here, in the tower by the Thames, it is original, the source from which the others derive. The bells that play it are the ones for which it was written, the ones that have rung it longer than any others. The mechanism that operates the quarter bells is separate from the main clock mechanism, though connected to it. The quarter bells have their own hammers, their own system of cams and levers that determines when each bell is struck and in what sequence. The system is mechanical, pre-programmed in metal, a set of instructions that cannot be altered without physical modification. The bells ring in all weather. Rain does not stop them, wind does not stop them. Snow can muffle the sound slightly, absorbing some of the vibrations, but the bells still ring and the sound still carries. In fog, the sound seems closer, more immediate, as if the bell were ringing just beyond sight. In clear air, the sound travels farther, reaching neighborhoods miles away, faint but present. There are stories about the bells. People say they heard them at moments of significance, that the sound accompanied news of births or deaths, of marriages or partings. The bells do not know this. They ring according to the clock, indifferent to what is happening in the lives of those who hear them. But the sound becomes associated with moments, and memory links the two, creating connections that feel meaningful even if they are accidental. The tower has been photographed countless times. It appears on postcards, in films, in paintings and drawings. It is a symbol of London, of Britain, of a particular idea of time and continuity. The image is so familiar that it risks becoming invisible, seen but not noticed, like something that has always been there and always will be. But the tower is not eternal. Stone erodes, metal fatigues, the crack in the bell could widen, the mechanism could fail in ways that cannot be repaired. The tower stands because people maintain it, because resources are devoted to its preservation, because there is a collective agreement that it should continue. Without that agreement, the tower would decline, weather would take its toll, the clock would stop, the bells would fall silent, the structure would become a ruin, visited by those curious about what it once was, what it once meant. But that has not happened. The tower is maintained, and so it continues. The night deepens over London. The lights in windows begin to dim. The streets grow quieter. The river moves as it always moves, dark and slow, carrying what it carries. The tower stands beside the river, illuminated, its clock faces glowing against the stone. Inside, the mechanism turns. The pendulum swings. The weights descend, pulling the gears forward, driving the hands around the faces. The process is continuous, unbroken, a rhythm that does not pause for the world around it. The clockmakers have gone home, the tourists have dispersed. The workers who maintain the building have locked the doors, left the tower to its own devices. But the clock does not need them now. It will run through the night, as it has run through countless nights, marking the hours for anyone who cares to know them. At midnight, the bells will ring 12 times. The sound will echo across the city, a familiar sequence, a marker that one day has ended and another has begun. People sleeping will not wake. People still awake will note the hour, perhaps look up, perhaps not. The sound will fade, and the silence that follows will be the silence of a city at rest, a pause before the next day begins. The tower will remain, the clock will continue, the bell will ring again in an hour, and then another hour, and then another. The cycle will repeat, as long as the mechanism is maintained, as long as the tower stands, as long as there are people who believe that time should be marked, that hours should be counted, that a bell should ring to announce them. The stone holds the weight, the metal turns, the sound travels. These are simple facts, but together they create something more, something that has become part of the city's identity, part of its daily experience. The tower is not just a structure, it is a presence, a constant in a world that changes, a voice that speaks in bronze and air. The fog thickens along the Thames. The water disappears into it, leaving only the sound of its movement, a quiet rushing that blends with the distant hum of the city. The tower rises above the fog, its upper levels clear, the clock faces visible, glowing softly. From a distance, the tower seems smaller than it is. It is only when you stand beside it, looking up at the stone rising above you, that you understand its scale. The blocks are larger than they appear from across the river. The carvings are more intricate. The tower is not just tall, it is substantial, built to endure. But endurance requires effort. The tower endures because people choose to preserve it, because they climb the stairs, check the gears, replace what is worn, repair what is broken. Without this effort, the tower would not endure. It would become what all abandoned structures become, a shell, a memory, a place that once had purpose and no longer does. The effort continues. It will continue as long as the decision is made to continue it. That decision is not guaranteed. Priorities change, resources shift. What seems essential in one era may seem expendable in another, but for now, the decision holds. The tower is maintained, the clock runs, the bell rings. The hour approaches, the mechanism prepares, though preparation is not a conscious act. The gears turn, the cams align, the hammer is lifted, positioned. When the clock's hands reach the appointed position, the hammer will release, swing forward, strike the bell. The sound will emerge. It will travel across the river, through the fog, into the city beyond. It will mark the hour as it has marked hours for more than a century and a half. It will be heard and not heard, noticed and ignored, part of the background and part of the foreground, depending on who is listening, where they are, what they are doing. The bell will ring and the city will continue. The two are not dependent on each other, but they are connected, woven together by time and proximity and the simple fact of coexistence. The bell rings in the city exists around the bell. Neither would be quite the same without the other. The tower stands, the clock turns, the bell waits. These are constants for now, they may not always be constants. Nothing is permanent, not even stone, not even bronze, but tonight they are here. Tonight the tower rises beside the river, the clock marks the hours, the bell rings when called upon. The fog continues to gather, the river continues to move, the city continues to breathe, a living thing made of people and structures, of noise and silence, of light and shadow. The tower is part of this, a piece of the whole, contributing its sound, its presence, its steady marking of time. The pendulum swings back and forth, second by second. The motion is simple, but it drives everything else, the entire mechanism following from this one constant rhythm. The pendulum does not tire, it does not doubt. It swings as long as the weights are maintained, as long as the mechanism is sound. And the weights descend slowly, pulling the clock forward. They will reach the bottom of their shafts eventually, and then they must be raised again, wound back to the top so they can descend once more. The process repeats. It has repeated for more than a century. It will repeat for as long as someone climbs the stairs, turns the crank, performs the work that gravity then transforms into time. The hour arrives, the hammer releases, the bell rings. The sound is deep. It resonates through the stone, through the air, through the fog. It crosses the river without hesitation, moves through streets as if they were open fields. It finds ears and enters them, a vibration that becomes a sensation that the brain interprets as sound. The sound fades, the bell falls silent, the mechanism resets, preparing for the next hour, the next ringing. The cycle continues. The city receives the sound, absorbs it, moves on. Lights continue to dim, traffic thins further. The night deepens toward the small hours when the city is at its quietest, when even the river seems to move more slowly. The tower remains awake. It does not sleep. It cannot. It stands and the clock runs and the bell waits for the next hour. This is its purpose. This is what it does. The fog softens the edges of things. The tower's outline blurs slightly, though the clock faces remain clear, their light strong enough to penetrate the moisture in the air. The glow is steady, unchanging, a point of reference in a landscape that shifts with weather and light. The stone is cold now, the day's warmth has left it. The night air presses against the tower, and the tower stands against the air, neither yielding. The stone and the air exist in balance, each present, neither dominant. Inside, the mechanism turns. Outside, the city rests. The two continue in parallel, connected but separate, each following its own rhythm. The clock measures time. The city experiences it. The relationship is simple, functional, essential. The pendulum swings, the weights descend, the gears turn, the hands move. The clock does what it was built to do without variation. Without complaint, it is a machine, and machines do not question their purpose. They simply perform it as long as they are able. The tower holds the clock holds the time holds the city in a loose way, providing structure, creating rhythm, allowing coordination. Without clocks, the city would function differently, more loosely, less predictably. With them, it runs on schedules, on appointments, on the expectation that events will occur when they are supposed to occur. Big Ben is part of this system, but also apart from it. It is a public clock, a shared reference, something that belongs to everyone and no one. It does not run fast to make people hurry, does not run slow to give them more time. It runs at the rate the Earth turns, translating planetary motion into something audible, something that can be heard across miles. The bell rings again. Another hour has passed. The sound is the same as it was before, as it will be again. The bell does not vary its tone. It rings with the voice it has, the voice shaped by bronze and crack, by hammer and frame. The sound moves outward, finding the same streets, the same water, the same fog. It disperses and fades, leaving the night as it was, only marked, only counted. The river flows beneath bridges that are themselves monuments, structures built to carry traffic across water, to connect one bank with the other. The bridges are lit at night, their lights reflecting on the surface, creating patterns that shift with the current. The tower stands upstream from some bridges, downstream from others, part of a sequence of structures that line the Thames, each one serving its purpose, each one contributing to the city's infrastructure. The tower's purpose is not transportation. It does not carry traffic. It does not span a gap. Its purpose is symbolic and functional in equal measure, to mark time, to be seen, to announce the hours with sound. It performs these functions continuously, without interruption except for maintenance, without modification except for repair. The restoration that enclosed the tower in scaffolding was the most extensive intervention in its history. Before that, there had been smaller repairs, routine maintenance, adjustments made to keep the mechanism running. But the restoration was different. It was comprehensive, addressing not just the clock, but the entire structure, from foundation to pinnacle. The workers who conducted the restoration found evidence of the tower's history in its fabric. They found marks left by the original masons, scratches and notations that indicated how stones should be placed. They found soot embedded so deeply in the stone that it had become part of its color. They found rust and water damage, places where the elements had won small victories, penetrating defenses, beginning the slow work of erosion. They found, too, that the tower was fundamentally sound. The foundation had not shifted. The walls were plumb, straight, bearing their weight as they were designed to do. The iron framework that reinforced the structure was intact, requiring treatment but not replacement. The tower had aged, but it had aged well, a testament to the care taken in its construction. The restoration returned the tower to something closer to its original appearance. The stone was cleaned, revealing a pale color that surprised people accustomed to seeing it dark. The clock faces were repaired, their glass replaced, their mechanisms restored. The bells were left largely untouched. They were still functional, still capable of producing sound, and their age was considered part of their value. When the scaffolding came down and the tower was revealed again, there was a moment of recognition, of seeing something familiar made new. The tower was the same, but also different, brighter, clearer, more distinct. The change was superficial in some ways. The structure beneath the surface had not fundamentally altered, but it was significant too, a reminder that what we see is not always what is there, that surfaces can obscure as well as reveal. The clock resumed its work. The hands began to move again. The bells rang. The sound was as it had been, unchanged by the restoration, still carrying the same deep tone, still announcing the hours to anyone within range. The tower returned to being a constant, a presence taken for granted. The novelty of its cleaned appearance faded as people became accustomed to it, as the stone began to accumulate new layers of soot and grime, as the cycle of agging began again. The tower would need maintenance in the future, repairs, perhaps another restoration decades hence. But for now, it had been cared for, and it stood ready to continue its work for years to come. The mechanism inside the tower is not visible to most who see the building. They see the exterior, the clock faces, perhaps the glimpse of the bell through the arches of the belfry, but they do not see the gears, the pendulum, the weights. The mechanism is hidden, enclosed, protected from weather and interference. It does its work in darkness, in rooms that are functional rather than decorative, spaces designed for machinery rather than people. Yet the mechanism is what gives the tower its purpose. Without it, the tower would be merely tall, merely decorative. The mechanism transforms the tower into something functional, something that contributes to the city's daily rhythm. The mechanism is the heart, and the tower is the body that protects and displays it. The clockmakers who maintain the mechanism understand this. They tend to the gears with the same care a surgeon might tend to a patient, checking for signs of wear, addressing problems before they become failures. They know that the mechanism is old, that parts of it have been running for more than a century and a half, that metal fatigues, that lubricants break down, that nothing lasts forever without intervention. But they also know that with care, the mechanism can continue for a very long time. There is no theoretical limit to how long a well-maintained clock can run. As long as parts are replaced when needed, as long as adjustments are made, as long as someone winds the weights, the clock can continue indefinitely. It is not immortal, but it is renewable, capable of outlasting any single generation, any single lifetime. The pendulum swings in its chamber, alone except when the clockmakers visit. The swing is regular, unvarying, governed by forces that do not change. The length of the pendulum, the pull of gravity, the resistance of the air. These forces combine to create a period, a rhythm, a beat that the mechanism follows. The pendulum is enclosed in a case that protects it from drafts, from changes in air pressure that might affect its swing. The case is not airtight. The pendulum needs to be accessible for adjustment, but it provides stability, reducing variables that might interfere with the clock's accuracy. Temperature still affects the pendulum, despite the compensation built into its design. On very hot days, the metal expands slightly. On very cold days, it contracts. The changes are small, measured in fractions of a millimeter, but they are enough to alter the pendulum's period by tiny amounts, enough to affect the clock's accuracy over time. The clockmakers monitor this. They compare the clock's time to an atomic standard, a reference so precise that it does not drift, does not vary. When the clock diverges from the standard, adjustments are made. Usually this involves adding or removing pennies from the stack on top of the pendulum. The pennies are old, predecimal British coins, chosen because they are the right weight, because they have always been used for this purpose, because tradition matters in the maintenance of old mechanisms. Adding a penny raises the pendulum's center of mass slightly, which speeds up its swing, which speeds up the clock. Removing a penny has the opposite effect. The adjustments are small but effective. A single penny can change the clock's rate by about half a second per day, enough to bring it back into alignment with the atomic standard. The atomic standard is invisible, intangible, a count of vibrations in a cesium atom, a phenomenon that occurs at scales far below human perception. Yet this is what defines the second now, what determines whether the clock in the tower is running fast or slow. The two systems, mechanical and atomic, exist side by side, one visible and audible, the other hidden and silent, one old and the other comparatively new. The clock does not compete with the atomic standard. It serves a different purpose. The atomic standard is precise beyond any practical need for most purposes. The clock in the tower is precise enough to be useful, to be trusted, to serve as a public reference. Its value is not just in its accuracy, but in its presence, in the fact that it can be seen and heard, that it occupies space in the physical world. The bell rings because a hammer strikes it. The hammer swings because a lever releases it. The lever releases because a cam turns past it. The cam turns because a gear drives it. The gear turns because the clock's mechanism drives it. The mechanism runs because weights descend. The weights descend because gravity pulls them. Gravity pulls them because the Earth has mass, because all mass attracts all other mass. The chain of causation extends backward through mechanisms and forces until it reaches the fundamental structure of the universe. But standing beside the tower, listening to the bell, you do not think about gravity or mass or the structure of the universe. You think about the hour, about what you need to do next, about whether you are late or early or exactly on time. The bell serves a human purpose, and that purpose is fulfilled in the moment the sound reaches your ears. The tower does not know about purposes, it stands. The clock does not know about time, it turns. The bell does not know about sound, it resonates when struck. These are mechanical processes, physical phenomena, events that occur because of the way matter and energy interact. Meaning is something humans add, a layer of interpretation placed over physical facts. Yet the meaning matters. The tower is maintained because it means something to people, because they value what it represents, because they want it to continue. Without that meaning, the tower would be abandoned, left to decay, eventually demolished or allowed to crumble. Meaning is what keeps the tower standing, what keeps the clock running, what keeps the bell ringing. The night continues. Hours pass, each one marked by the bell, each one measured by the clock. The fog begins to thin as the air cools further, as moisture condenses into dew that settles on grass and stone. The stars remain hidden, obscured by city light, by haze, by the glow that rises from streets and buildings. The tower's shadow stretches across the ground when the moon is visible, but tonight there is no moon, or it is hidden, and the tower casts no shadow. It is only a shape against the sky, defined by its own light, by the glow of the clock faces, by the lamps that illuminate its stone. Inside, the mechanism continues its work. The gears mesh and turn. The escapement releases, catches, releases. The pendulum swings through its arc, patient, tireless. The weights descend another increment, pulling the mechanism forward another small measure. The weights will need to be wound soon. They descend continuously, and there is only so much shaft for them to travel. When they reach the bottom, they must be raised, and the process begins again. The winding is scheduled regular, a task that clockmakers perform on a fixed rotation. They climb the stairs, unlock the winding mechanism, turn the cranks that raise the weights. The work requires strength and time, but it is straightforward, a procedure repeated so many times that it has become routine. The routine is important. It ensures that the clock does not stop, that the weights are always at a height from which they can descend, always providing the force the mechanism needs. A stopped clock is useless or nearly so. It shows a time, but the time it shows is fixed, unchanging, and therefore irrelevant. A running clock, even if it runs slightly fast or slow, is still useful. It shows time passing, and that is what matters. The tower has stopped only rarely. During the World Wars, the bells were silenced at night, but the clock continued to run, its hands moving even though no sound marked the hours. During maintenance, the clock has been stopped for repairs, for cleaning, for the installation of new parts. But these stoppages have been brief, measured in days or weeks, not months or years. The longest stoppage in recent history was during the restoration. The clock was stopped for several years while the work was done. The silence was strange. People reported feeling disoriented, missing the sound of the bells, feeling as though something essential had been removed from the city's soundscape. When the clock resumed, there was relief, a sense that things had returned to normal, that the city was whole again. The tower's role in the city is both practical and symbolic. Practically, it provides a time reference, a way for people to check the hour without consulting a personal device. Symbolically, it represents continuity, stability, the idea that some things endure despite change. Both roles are important, and both depend on the tower continuing to function, on the clock continuing to run, on the bell continuing to ring. The bell's tone is distinctive. If you heard it in a recording, separated from any visual context, you might still recognize it. The deep resonance, the slight dissonance from the crack, the way the sound emerges and fades, these qualities are unique, identifiable. The bell has a voice, and the voice is known. Other bells ring in London. Church bells mostly, marking services and celebrations, ringing changes in the English tradition of campanology. But Big Ben is different. It is not a church bell. It does not call people to worship. It marks time, and only time, with a regularity that church bells do not match. The regularity is part of what makes the bell significant. It rings every hour, without fail, without variation in timing. The sound is predictable, dependable, a constant in a world where much is unpredictable. People plan around it, use it as a reference, rely on it in ways they might not even consciously recognize. The reliability of the bell depends on the reliability of the clock, which depends on the reliability of the mechanism, which depends on the care of the clockmakers. The chain of dependence is clear. Remove any link, and the whole thing fails. The tower stands, but standing is not enough. It must function, and function requires maintenance, requires expertise, requires resources. The resources are provided. The expertise is maintained, passed from one generation of clockmakers to the next. The tradition continues because people choose to continue it, because they value what it produces, because they believe the effort is worthwhile. Belief is intangible, but its effects are concrete. Because people believe the tower should be maintained, it is maintained. Because they believe the clock should run, it runs. Because they believe the bell should ring, it rings. The belief sustains the reality, and the reality reinforces the belief. The tower stands in the present, but it is connected to the past. The stones were quarried in the 19th century. The mechanism was designed in the 19th century. The bell was cast in the 19th century. The tower is a physical link to that time, a structure that has persisted through the decades that followed, carrying the past into the present. But the tower is not a museum piece. It is not static. It has been repaired, updated, maintained. Parts of the mechanism have been replaced. The stonework has been cleaned and restored. The tower is old, but it is not unchanged. It has adapted, within the constraints of its design, to continue functioning in a world very different from the one in which it was built. The world of the tower's construction was one of gas lamps and horse-drawn carriages, of coal smoke and manual labor, of empires and hierarchies that no longer exist in the same form. The tower was built in that world, but it exists in this one, a survivor of changes that have transformed the city around it. London in the mid-19th century was the largest city in the world, the heart of an empire that spanned continents. The tower was built to reflect that status, to be a symbol of power and precision, to demonstrate that Britain could build something that worked perfectly, that could be seen and heard from great distances, that would last. London today is different. The empire is gone. The city is still large, still significant, but in different ways. The tower remains, but its symbolism has shifted. It is no longer primarily a symbol of empire. It is a symbol of London itself, of continuity, of tradition, of the city's ability to preserve what it values while adapting to new realities. The bell rings, the hour passes, the night moves toward morning, though morning is still distant, still beyond the horizon. The city sleeps, or tries to, or gives up and stays awake. The river flows, the tower stands, the clock turns. These are simple facts, but they contain layers. The river flows because of gravity, because of rainfall in distant hills, because of the water cycle that moves moisture from sea to air to land and back. The tower stands because of engineering, because of the strength of stone and iron, because of foundations dug deep into clay. The clock turns because of mechanism, because of weights and gears and the swing of a pendulum. Each fact depends on others. Each is part of a system. The tower is part of the city. The clock is part of the tower. The mechanism is part of the clock. The pendulum is part of the mechanism. Each piece fits into a larger whole, and the whole functions because the pieces work together. The clockmakers understand this. They do not work on isolated parts. They work on the mechanism as a system, understanding how changes in one area affect others, how the parts interact, how the whole maintains its function. Their work is careful, deliberate, informed by knowledge that has been accumulated over more than a century of maintaining this particular clock. The knowledge is both written and unwritten. There are manuals, diagrams, records of repairs and adjustments. But there is also knowledge that exists only in practice, in the experience of working with the mechanism, in the feel of a gear that is beginning to wear, in the sound of a shaft that needs lubrication. This knowledge is harder to preserve, harder to pass on. It requires apprenticeship, observation, hands-on experience. The clockmakers who work on the tower today learned from those who worked on it before them. They will pass their knowledge to those who come after. The chain of transmission is direct, personal, a lineage of expertise that extends back to the tower's construction. The tower will eventually require another generation of clockmakers, and then another. As long as the decision is made to maintain it, there will be people trained to do the work, people who understand the mechanism, people who care about its continued function. The care is not abstract. It is physical, performed with tools, with hands, with attention. The clockmakers climb the stairs, enter the mechanism rooms, examine the gears, make adjustments. They feel the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that if they make a mistake, the clock might stop, the bells might not ring, the city might lose its timekeeper. But mistakes are rare. The work is done carefully, checked, verified. The mechanism continues to run, and the bell continues to ring, and the tower continues to stand. The night is deepest now, the hours between midnight and dawn when the city is at its quietest. Traffic is sparse, most windows are dark, the river moves through near silence, its sound audible without the competition of other noises. The tower is awake, it does not sleep, does not rest. The clock runs through the darkest hours as it runs through the brightest, indifferent to light or dark, to activity or stillness. Time does not stop for night, and neither does the clock that measures it. The pendulum swings in its chamber, visible to no one, performing its function without audience. The swing is smooth, consistent, a motion that has been repeated billions of times since the clock was first started. The pendulum does not tire. It is pushed slightly with each swing by the escapement, given just enough energy to overcome friction and air resistance, and it continues. The escapement is a small mechanism that performs a crucial function. It converts the continuous force of the descending weights into discrete impulses that drive the pendulum. Without the escapement, the pendulum would swing briefly and then stop, friction and air resistance draining its energy. With the escapement, the pendulum receives a tiny push with each swing, enough to keep it moving indefinitely. The escapement also controls the rate at which the weights descend. It releases the gear train one tooth at a time, allowing the mechanism to advance in small, regulated steps rather than all at once. This is what allows the clock to keep time rather than simply running until the weights reach the bottom. The escapement clicks with each release, a sound that is rhythmic, regular, audible in the quiet of the mechanism room. The clicking is the sound of time being divided, of continuous descent being transformed into discrete moments. It is a mechanical heartbeat, the pulse of the clock. The mechanism room is cold at night. The stone walls hold little warmth, and heat is not necessary for the mechanism's function. The clockmakers work in the cold when they must, their breath visible, their hands requiring gloves for comfort, though not for the delicate work, which must be done with bare fingers. The mechanism does not mind the cold. Metal contracts slightly, but the design accounts for this. The clock runs as accurately in winter as in summer, the temperature compensation built into the pendulum ensuring that the rate remains constant. Outside, frost begins to form on surfaces that can radiate heat to the clear sky. The grass in nearby parks becomes white. The stone of the tower does not frost. It retains too much heat from the day, releases it too slowly, but it grows colder, approaching the temperature of the air. The bell will ring again soon. The hour approaches. The mechanism prepares, the hammer rising, the system of cams and levers positioning everything for the moment when the clock's hands align with the hour mark. The alignment is precise. The hands do not drift. They point exactly where they should, their positions determined by the gears that drive them, by the pendulum that controls those gears, by the weights that power everything. The system is hierarchical, each level governed by the one above it, everything ultimately controlled by the steady swing of the pendulum. When the hands align, the hammer releases. It swings forward, driven by its own weight, accelerating until it strikes the bell. The impact is violent in a way, hundreds of pounds of metal hitting metal at speed, but the result is not violence. It is sound, a tone that emerges from the bell and fills the air. The bell vibrates. The vibration is complex, the entire structure of the bell moving in patterns that create the sound. The thick rim vibrates at a low frequency, producing the fundamental tone. Thinner sections vibrate faster, producing overtones. The combination creates the bell's characteristic voice, a sound that is immediately recognizable. The vibration dampens gradually. The bell is heavy, and heavy objects vibrate for longer. The sound sustains for seconds, fading as the vibration decreases, as the energy of the hammer strike dissipates into the air and into the structure of the tower. Then silence, the bell is still, the hour has been marked. The clock advances to the next hour and the cycle begins again. The sound travels across the sleeping city, reaching ears that may or may not be conscious of it. Some people hear it in their sleep, incorporating it into dreams, the deep tone becoming thunder or a voice or simply sound without source. Others hear it and check the time, noting the hour, perhaps adjusting their position, settling back into sleep. The bell does not know who hears it. It rings for everyone and no one, a public service that requires no acknowledgement, no response. The bell performs its function whether anyone is listening or not. This is the nature of public infrastructure. It serves regardless of use, provides regardless of demand. The tower stands, the clock runs, the bell rings, and these things continue whether the city pays attention or ignores them. The continuity is independent of recognition. But recognition matters too. The tower is preserved because it is valued, and value requires recognition. If the tower were ignored completely, if no one cared whether it stood or fell, whether the clock ran or stopped, then preservation would cease. The tower would decline, and eventually it would be gone. So the tower exists in a balance between independence and dependence. It functions independently, running without constant attention, maintaining its rhythm without supervision. But it depends on human care for its long-term survival, on maintenance and repair, on the decision to preserve it. The balance has held for more than a century and a half. It will likely hold for decades more, perhaps centuries, as long as the city values what the tower represents, as long as resources are available for its maintenance, as long as clockmakers can be trained to care for its mechanism. The tower's future is not guaranteed, but it is probable. Structures that have lasted this long tend to continue, momentum working in their favor. The tower has survived wars, fires, storms, changes in government, changes in society. It has become embedded in the city's identity, and that embedding provides protection, makes demolition or abandonment unlikely. But unlikely is not impossible. The tower exists in the present, not in some guaranteed future. Each day it stands is a day it has been maintained, a day the decision to preserve it has been renewed, even if implicitly. The tower's existence is an ongoing choice, repeated daily, annually, generationally. For now, the choice is to preserve. The tower stands, the clock runs, the bell rings. These are facts of the present moment. Facts that may extend into the future, that likely will, but that are not certain beyond this moment. The moment is enough. The bell rings now, the sound travels now, the city exists now, with the tower as part of it, as a presence that shapes the soundscape, that provides a reference, that connects the present to the past. The river flows beneath the tower, past the tower, beyond the tower. The water moves toward the sea, carrying what it carries, leaving the city behind. The tower does not move. It stands in place, marking a fixed point in a flowing world. The night continues toward morning. The stars, still hidden, wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. The earth turns beneath them, rotating at a rate so constant that it defines the second, the minute, the hour. The clock in the tower measures that rotation, translates it into something visible and audible, makes it human-scaled. The mechanism turns with the earth, not at the same rate, but in proportion to it. The earth rotates once in 24 hours. The clock's hour hand completes 2 rotations in the same period. The relationship is fixed, mathematical, expressed in gears and ratios. The pendulum swings, 2 seconds per swing, back and forth, a rhythm that mirrors the human pulse in its steadiness, if not its rate. The swing is hypnotic if you watch it, meditative, a focus that empties the mind of other concerns. The clockmakers sometimes sit in the pendulum room, watching the swing, listening to the mechanism's sounds. They say it is peaceful, that the regular rhythm has a calming effect, that the mechanism's reliability is reassuring. They are surrounded by motion that never stops, never varies, never fails, and in that constancy, there is something restful. The tower offers no such rest to those outside it, but it offers reliability, and reliability is its own kind of rest, a certainty that the hours will be marked, that time will be kept, that tomorrow will bring the same rhythm as today. The bell will ring in the morning, it will ring through the afternoon, it will ring into the next night and the night after that. The sequence will continue, each hour marked, each day counted, time measured and announced and allowed to pass. The tower stands beside the river, pale stone against the dark sky, clock faces glowing, bell waiting in its chamber. The night holds it, and it holds the night, a stillness that contains motion, a silence that contains sound, a structure that contains time. The pendulum swings, the weights descend, the gears turn, the hands move, the bell rings, the tower stands. And the city sleeps around it, unaware and aware, ignoring and attending, living alongside this structure that has become so familiar it is nearly invisible, so constant it is taken for granted. But the tower is there. It has always been there for as long as anyone living can remember, and it will be there tomorrow and the day after, marking time, announcing hours, standing beside the river as it has stood for more than 150 years. The stone holds, the metal turns, the sound travels. These are simple facts. They are enough,